separately as the introduction to China. So China doesn't really produce like a great world religion per se. There's no Christianity or Islam or Sikhism or Hinduism or Buddhism that comes out of China. It's different. It's more of a philosophical system that comes out of there. By the way, this philosophical system that comes during the Aetial period, known as Confucianism, is actually still being taught by the Chinese, right, in schools and things around the world as an ethical system, but not as a religion, per se. Okay, so we're looking at Chinese religions and Taoism. When I say religions, just like all ancient societies, they had some sort of worship and some sort of belief system before the Aetial Revolution. They're going to go through their same Aetial Revolution everybody else does. So we have to first examine then what were their religions before that. Well, a lot in some ways, they're very similar to other religions, but there's a certain kind of flavor to Eastern religion that's a little different than in the West. And one of these philosophies, if you will, is the balance of forces, that there's forces in opposition to each other. Now by the way, the Egyptians had this, the Mesopotamians had this. This is something that you do see in the ancient world, but I just think it's kind of cleaner and easier to explain here. There's two forces called yin and yang. And yin and yang have got to work together. I mean, come on, let's be honest. The Egyptians had it right. You had day and night. Okay, those were two kind of opposing forces. But this right here binds it together in a new way. And you've probably seen this symbol. How many have seen this symbol here before, right? I mean, pretty much everybody on the planet's seen that. Yin and yang. Yin is this dark side here, is darkness, coolness. It's the feminine property. I'm sorry, that was just that video basically finishing up. So let's jump back. So this is the moon, the damp, and the shadow. I mean, at night, right? What happens to the lawns? That you get dew on them, right? In the morning, you wake up and the sun comes and the dew is evaporated. So if you look at yang, you got lightness, warmth, the male side of things, dry, and sunshine. It's a balance, and guess what? You need both. You have to have both. One without the other doesn't work. And so there's this kind of tremendous appreciation for the balance in the world that I think we should just kind of start with. And then we need to look at their ancient religion. And in the ancient religions, they were basically polytheists, just like the Hindus would be, just like the people in Mesopotamia and Egypt and so on. There was a strong animistic side to it, with animism, right? Worshipping of like nature and plants and things like that. Think of the Druids, for example, in England, worshipping every form of tree, that kind of thing. But there were also rituals, just like there were in other ancient societies. Rituals for the fertility of the soil, to bring in the harvest, the planting season and all of that. And in China, there was a lot of belief in spirits, lots of different kinds of spirits, two kinds of spirits, go back to yin and yang here. You get Chen, the sun, the spring, these lighter forces, and Kui, the dark and the gloomy. And in a sense, isn't life just a whole series of opposites? You have happy and sad, but can you really know what happiness is if you haven't experienced sadness? That kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? Now, they were also big on burials, okay? Just like the Egyptians, right? Where they go to these great lengths to bury an emperor. And sometimes they buried people with them. Later, they said, no, let's bury instead little figures. And when we get a drop of divine blood, boom, then they're going to turn into servants and things. People don't like to be buried with their leaders. Okay, that's just not something. But it happened early in China, where wealthy men, powerful men, would be buried with their servants and their wives. That practice is not going to last very long, obviously. So instead, what he uses as a substitute? Well, just like in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, where they'd have these figures, like remember the oarsmen on the boat? Here, they went to much more elaborate effect. And when one emperor died, he had an entire army buried with him in order to take that army into the afterlife. I'm going to go to a picture of a place I've been, Cheong, China, and I got to see the terracotta warriors. And this was a site that was uncovered, that was found almost by accident. But wow, if you ever go to China, you got to make the effort to go up to this part of China and see this. It's massive, and it's still being excavated. It's one of those delicate sites where you have to be very careful to get the dirt away and not to damage these, because terracotta basically is like pottery, but that's hollow in the middle. You got to be really careful. You can break them. And a whole army has been made to take this emperor into the afterlife so he can have his army with him. I get a kick out of some of these. Like, for example, they were actually had full weapons and things ready in their hands, able to fight with them and all that kind of stuff. But look at it, it's immense. It is absolutely immense. It's like this huge shed, but it's massive. Think of like 2 or 3 football fields all covered in, and they're still digging these things up. A terracotta warrior, a real one, is worth a fortune, and they're not allowed to take them out of China. Some people have stolen some. Boy, I'll tell you, there's a heavy penalty for that. We got to film it. We had to pay a fee to film it for an educational video we were working on. But these things are impressive. Now, people, of course, make souvenirs, okay, that look like these terracotta warriors and stuff. And so it's really kind of important. So luckily, sculptures replaced people in these burial ceremonies. So that's kind of important to note. But if you ever get a chance, that's just one of the, by the way, going to China is an immensely cool experience. Beijing, what a city, fascinating. Shanghai, you'll never forget it. Hong Kong, one of my favorite places on the planet. If you ever get a chance to go to China, you should go there. It's a country on the move. It's a country that's very advanced. It's very fast paced. It's very scientific. You're going to feel actually technologically and all that very much at home. You're going to feel like, oh yeah, this is maybe but the United States, with automobiles and top quality things, and just anyway, you're going to feel very familiar to you. It's not going to be foreign at all, except for all the signs are in Chinese, right? But as far as the attitudes of people, their brains, their intelligence, their business activities, that kind of stuff, it's just a place that's a lot like the United States, frankly, in many ways. But not so in the ancient world. In the ancient world, they would have had, of course, we never had an ancient world except for the Native Americans, right? So United States is a completely inside the modern world phenomenon. But they had way back, 5,000 years ago, called filial piety, probably as much as any society. You remember Mesopotamia, that Hammurabi's code, that one of the codes was to respect your parents, honor thy father and thy mother in the Torah, for example, in Jewish history. Here, that is an absolute, and it goes even, I think, beyond anybody else. You basically venerate or respect old age. Ancestor worship too. When people die, you worship those ancestors. And I've been to homes where they have little shrines, if you will, and pictures, where cameras became available, of all the people that preceded them, as many as they have. And they have a little altar, and they may offer some fruit or some offerings, whatever, to those spirits. That still goes on today. And veneration of old people is probably a smart idea. I go back to one story that I think I failed to tell you. It's like, why were older people in a society that was migratory, taking herds from one place to the next, to the next, to the next? Listen, that's hard work. You think that it'd be young people that would be venerated, but old people had seen so much and had so many experiences. So imagine if in their youth they had experienced a drought, and the families had to figure out how to keep the herds alive during this drought, where they went, where the water was, all this kind of stuff. These were kind of secrets that only the old people knew. They didn't have a magic Google machine like you guys, and you can think you can look up every answer. They had to go ask an old person, what do we do? Well, when I was a kid, we did this, and let's try over here. And they had knowledge that young people would have no experience with. So the people that did live to old age were venerated. They were respected for their knowledge. In fact, we're going to talk about a guy named Lao Tzu, And Lao Tzu is basically his whole name means the old master. In some aphorisms or little writings, if you will, at this time in China, life begins at 60. At 60 is when people pay respect to you and your opinions and your thoughts. That does not happen in America. In America, it's quite the opposite. Old people are kind of, go retire somewhere. Let's get you out of here, right? Because we're very much a youth culture. And yeah, so trust me, when you get older, sometimes you don't get kind of the respect that you would if you lived in China or in Japan or some other countries like that have this veneration for old people. Dead ancestors were worshipped as a connection to the spirit world. You see a little bit that in Latino culture, right? You're seeing it in that Dia de los Muertos. You guys heard about that, right? That's kind of, you see some of that too in the old ancient America culture that seeped into Christianity here in the New World. Divination is a big deal. That is, you can, like, for example, we talked about in Mesopotamia, they'd sacrifice a goat and look at its entrails and tell you whether or not it was a good time to go to war or not. Spartans would do that. Now we know this is nonsense today, but nevertheless, this idea that you can portend the future, you can learn the future through these mystical things that happen, like reading tea leaves or the back of a turtle shell or something like that. The flight of birds can tell you what's going to happen in the future. Stalks of grain. We talked a little bit about this in the earliest unit, where we looked at the calendar of China and how many religious holidays there are, and that there's certain days or times of the year where it's good to get married and not good to get married, when it's a good time to start a business, not a good time to start a business. And also every year has an animal, and depending on the animal, it gives you certain attributes, right? All this kind of stuff, I don't know, it's fascinating, it's fun, it's interesting, but it's old style, ancient Chinese ideas of worship that still kind of blend a little bit into modern society, just a little bit. They're not very superstitious people, the Chinese, you should know, but there's still some of these traditions that live on. All right, now we're going to go to the ancient period then. So you're having this ancestor worship, you're having this animism, you're having these polytheistic kinds of experiences. And then along come two ancient thinkers that changed China dramatically. One is extremely mystical and very hard to understand. The other one is very concrete and gives you exact rules for how you should live your life. This is more of an ethical type of philosophical kind of thing, like the Greeks would give the Western world. And I wouldn't count it as a religion, as more just a way people should live together. So that's a good place to stop, and we'll go from there.